Hi, I'm Kevin Drinkall.
Hi, and I'm Michel Nicolai, and we welcome you to Zyzal Networks podcast.
We've been in the network industry for over 15 years, and in these podcasts we want to try and untangle the world of networking, debunk some of those myths, explain some real-world examples along the way, to help you make better choices about selecting the right tech, product, and even help you guys build faster, more reliable, scalable networks, or just to keep your kids happy at home. Well, welcome back to another podcast.
Yeah, and today we are talking about mGig.
Again?
Yeah, we thought that it was appropriate to take you to the next level because we talked about it, I think 1 or 2 years ago, and we did an introduction because it's quite new to everyone. But I think it is the right time to give everyone an update because there's a big development in mGig.
As time's gone on, it's become more and more, noticeable in the marketplace that mGig exists. To help us out, we brought back Luke.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Hello, everybody.
So good to be back, Luke. And of course, we want to know everything about switching, and especially today about mGig. So maybe you can...
You can maybe start us off with telling us what is mGig?
What is mGig? Yeah.
mGig is the speeds beyond the 1 gig standard. We have standards in place to make sure that everybody uses the same. So the standard we're talking about right now for the 2.5 and 5 gig is the 802.3BZ, which is around for quite a while. And also 802.3AN, which is 10 gig. We came much earlier than the 2.5 and the 5 gig. So these two standards we're talking about, they're coming together. People are using the 10 gig for quite a while because it's a 10 gig copper for uplinks, linking a 10 gig switch into a aggregation switch. But now with 2.5 and 5, the network, the simple network connecting your computer or Wi-Fi will get quicker.
Yeah, so I think, when you talk about mGig, you can actually feel that we've surpassed that 1 gig barrier. I mean, real speeds, right?
Exactly. And then the benefit that we can still remain using our copper wire to keep using the infrastructure that we have. And now, as Luke mentioned, that we have the AN standard on 10G, that normally people see 10G as a fiber connection, but no, it can also be easily on a copper wire. So that gives a big opportunity to build a very fast network.
Yeah, I mean, these standards have been around for quite some time, but now that there's a driving force of like Wi-Fi 7, which pretty much is standardized on 2.5 gig as a minimum requirement, we have so many models with 2.5 gig on the back of them already. It's too many to mention,
yeah,
right?
Especially with Wi-Fi 7. The speed's going up. 1 gig back to the network is not enough anymore. So we need to scale up. So 2.5 is already the standard in Wi-Fi 7. And we even see access points that require even faster connections, like the 650S. It's not a Wi-Fi 7, but Wi-Fi 6 device. Requires a 5 gigabit interface. And our current flagship, the Wi-Fi 7, the WBE660S, even requires a 10G copper connection back into the network.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about Wi-Fi 7 access points, I mean, obviously we're not going to talk too much, otherwise Luke's going to get a bit annoyed with us, right? But the Wi-Fi really is a big driver in mGig. Our entry-level model is a tri-band Wi-Fi 7 model, and it does 11 gigabits per second. And our flagship, which you mentioned, the 660, has a whopping 22 gigabits per second throughput. So really, really fast. And the great thing about these access points is even if you don't have the 10 gig infrastructure in the back on the copper, you can use 2.5, you can use 5.
Exactly,
so
it's downwards compatible.
Exactly, right, yes.
And the best thing about all this Wi-Fi is driving the speed up into the switches. And we support all these speeds in our switches already.
That's right. We have quite a lot of switches that support this series, and we'll cover that in this podcast for sure. I think the models will go over a bit further. Other driving factors of mGig is also the connectivity is massively improving. It's not everywhere, but certainly in a lot of countries now we're seeing
connections
over 1 gig, right?
Yeah, and therefore you already see that we have some products that can provide that connectivity. Yeah, think about the USG 60 Lite that we have, the new Flex 8 series, the 200 and above have multi-gig interfaces, and even our FWA 710 outdoor.
5G.
5G
Yeah.
also have a 2.5 gig uplink.
Yeah, so
you see it also on that part of the network.
Yeah, so theoretically, a lot of the connectivity, internet-based, whether it be even like you say 5G, they're surpassing 1 gig as well, right? We are shipping products with multi-gig on the internet connectivity side of things as well, right? So it's a massive, massive improvement in terms of performance. And again, like Luke mentioned before, right? Faster speeds needs to go somewhere, right? It needs to go back to wire. And that means that the connectivity on the switches is really important part of that. There are obviously some verticals that are also driving multi-gig as well. But I think generally it's about the increase in capacity of products, right?
Yeah, that's correct, Kevin. It's the capacity of the network and also the capacity of the Wi-Fi, which is driving the 2.5 gig networking. But again, the verticals, think about something like healthcare, where you need to have real-time information on surgery in the operation room. You need to have this real high-speed connectivity to your monitor and to your network. Not only healthcare, of course, but there's lots of examples to think about in verticals.
Yeah, there's a big rise in, I would say, edge computing as well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about this in the Trend podcast for the trends for 2025. I mean, it was already a thing in 2024 and so on. But obviously driving lower latency to the edge of the network is really important in terms of performance. And that's just another factor for multi-gig and why there's a drive to, move to multi-gig as a standard.
And don't forget, there are many devices that now are connected through Wi-Fi. Yeah, it's not only a telephone or a tablet. Everything gets connected over Wi-Fi. Yeah, it's important that we can take all that information through to the network.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, when you look at Wi-Fi 7 access points, a big part of Wi-Fi 7, for example, is capacity. More capacity on a single access point with lower latency driving into the network. And even when we talked about the WAC 650S, you mentioned that, with the 5 gig on the back.
Yeah.
This is a high capacity access point in terms of how many devices can be connected to it or, reliably. People really, driving for reliance and reliability in the network. They don't want to have these bottlenecks So yes, it starts at Wi-Fi, but then it moves to wire. Yeah. Then it moves to internet. So that is a big part of that cycle. And I think now is the time for change in multi-gig. So
maybe it's also a good opportunity, maybe Luke, to explain that we have a lot of different models in different segments that we can use, that it's not automatically an expensive product that you have to buy.
So we're talking about verticals, the big verticals, the healthcare and edge computing, but there's also demand on 2.5 gig speeds in small businesses. It's not just that, the bigger companies need this 2.5 gig. It's also the smaller ones where you have 1 or 2 access points where you want to have this full Wi-Fi speed on your network. Also, the increased capacity and increased bandwidth of the applications which are on the network, they're looking into wanting more network speed. And to be fair, it's quite easy to install 2.5 gig on your existing network because it can be used on existing cabling, especially if you have, for instance, Cat6 cabling in your home or in your office. Then you can do 2.5 gig, 5 gig on 100 meters. If you want to go to 10 gig, then you have to be sure that if you have Cat6, you only can do 55 meters on the length of your cable. Existing cabling does not have to be a bottleneck to upgrade your network speed into 2.5 gig.
So while you're using Cat6 and Cat6A, right, you can obviously also use that with PoE as well, right? So we want to cover the PoE bit in a minute as well. And I use 2.5 gig at home, but I would say businesses can follow the same. Like you mentioned before, as a very cost-effective approach for multi-gig, you can use the XMG 1915, which is actually exactly the products I use, right? And I use it part of a hobby. I use, photography. And just like everything else is getting bigger, image sizes are getting bigger, etc. And I carry that across on a NAS, right? right? But for basic things like backing up PCs and stuff like that, I mean, I'm a Mac user, right? So I back up the devices with a time machine. So fast backup connectivity on my machine to the NAS is even better, right? It works much more effectively. So it has endless amounts of benefits, right? So,
Correct. It's not just that you want to have higher speeds because it's there, but it's because of the convenience of having the higher speeds at your disposal.
well, we're also less tolerant, aren't we, to waiting for things as well?
That's true.
And people don't have to think that multi-gig is typically expensive or something, because we mentioned the XMG 1915 as an entry-level multi-gig switch, but also with entry-level access points. We talk about high-speed Wi-Fi 7s, but maybe that is very costly. And the NWA 50AX Pro, for instance, that is our entry-level product, requires a multi-gig connection. And it is really affordable. So it's not only for people that can spend money on, no, really for everyone, they can use the multi-gig technology to leverage from the higher speeds.
I mean, it's important to note as well, they are backward compatible, right? So, we say required, but actually, like that model, you can use it on a 1 gig if you want to, but the idea is to utilize its bandwidth correctly. The bottleneck will become the switch at that point. So,
at the end, yes.
Yeah, so of course, they even will go to 100 meg, right? But I mean, it's kind of a pointless process. Like we said before, they coexist with PoE. It's more efficient, right? We're delivering higher speeds, so up to 10 gig over copper cabling. So we don't need to replace the copper cabling, which is most of the time the most expensive approach. 100%. We've even done projects where we need to increase the bandwidth between 2 points. So rather than recabling with fiber, which was the way to do it.
Yeah, that was the way to go.
Yeah, now we just put 2 switches at the end
and you're done.
And we're done. And it does it, right?
Yeah.
So, and we can even, team the ports up, make it faster. So if you have 2 copper cables and 10 gig, you can get 20 gig out of it.
Yeah, or even more. Yeah.
That's right, yeah. So there is many options to it. And like I say, when we exist with PoE, and PoE++, so the 60 watts power, you have multi-gig PoE, the 1 cable becomes very, very important. And we also see a demand now in not just networking devices, but also accessories that
require the PoE.
It require PoE, right?
Yeah. So it's good for Luc to explain the different ones we have on PoE, because I don't think that all our listeners maybe know the wattage that we have on our PoE standard. Yeah. So maybe you can clarify that a little bit, Luc?
Yeah, sure. Talking about PoE, we talk about as a standard a PoE Plus, which is a 30 watt standard. And this is really what we use in nearly all our legacy APs, and also the Wi-Fi 7 can also utilize PoE Plus. But some devices just need more power. And this PoE++ standard delivers 60 watts over the same cable as you do on the Cat5e, Cat6 or Cat6a. So in a multi-gig environment, and if you want to have a PoE++ 60 watts, you can use the same cabling as you have in your existing infrastructure and have, let's say, 10 gig to your access point powered by 60 watts. And then you can think about, for instance, what Michel already mentioned, the WBE 660S and a XS 1930 12 HP. This switch has a 375 watts, and it has a power consumption mode where the switch will see how much power a device needs to have, not
what it really consumes.
Yeah, versus, obviously the standard, which in some of, I would say, the tier 1 vendors, they very much are very specific about if it says it's a class 1, class 2, class 3 device, or even, PoE, PoE+, PoE++ device, it will automatically allocate the 60 watts or 30 watts out of the budget and reserve it, regardless of whether he uses it or not. Actually, by default, now all of the switches, right? That's right. Yeah.
Correct. Are in consumption mode.
Yeah, they're all in consumption by default, right?
Yeah,
the switch has to be consumption mode or classification mode. That's the 2 modes that you can be in. Theoretically, you can, in some cases, you get twice as many PoE devices on one switch.
That's correct. And something we didn't touch till now is we have our Nebula cloud system, our Nebula cloud interface. And in this interface, you can easily see how much power one switch or your switches will consume in your network. Also, a very nice tool within Nebula, and I think the guys will talk a little bit more about Nebula when I'm finished about my switch part, is the cable diagnostics, where you can see if your cable is good enough or doesn't have any breaks in it to cater your network and to make sure that your distance is okay on speed. And also on the switch ports in Nebula, you can see what kind of speed is being delivered across the network. So maybe you guys want to talk a little bit more about Nebula?
Absolutely. I mean, Nebula is our baby, right?
I know.
And
Give him a finger.
And just what Luke mentioned, the speed, we give all the speeds a different color. So you can visualize immediately in your screen if your uplink or your connectivity to your whatever kind of device, your access point or your camera or whatever, has the right speed. The color will tell you what is the speed. So for troubleshooting, it's really convenient that you go into Nebula and you can see this immediately if your cable does do the performance that
absolutely,
that you're expecting.
I think without Nebula today, I mean, if you go back to the days before Nebula, it was very difficult to understand what was going on in switching, especially. But switching has always been a very complicated way to monitor and manage. People had to troll through logs to understand what was going on, etc. And I think now Nebula gives you a very visual view of what's going on with switching and how things are connected together and which port's being used where. So speeds up the deployment, even, clone devices to, and even create a template version where it will replicate the same switching configurations over and over again. So the functionality in Nebula is very vast, so I think it's very good to obviously mention that, even though we're talking about multi-gig. We talked briefly on the XMG 1915, right? You literally scan the barcode, you do a few clicks, and it's up and running, and you've got multi-gig. And you can remotely access it and configure the port.
Yep.
So it's a really straightforward process. So, like I say, for small businesses, that's perfect. And obviously, as we scale up into those product groups, we have, the next series, and I'll let Luke go through those product ranges, right, because that's his baby. We have models from, the entry level all the way up to the top. So, yes. Luke, maybe give us some, Yeah,
that's correct, Kevin. We have we talked about the XMG 1915 already, which is a 8-port PoE multi-gig switch, which comes in various configurations. But then we can go up to, for instance, a 30-port PoE switch, which has a whopping 700 watts, which comes with 24 times 2.5 gig, which is quite unique in the market, with also 4 times 10 gig ports, where you can mix and match all different kind of Wi-Fi equipment on it with enough PoE budget. We also talked about the XS 1930, which is a 10 gig. We also talked about the XS 1930 12 HP, which is a 10 gig switch with 375 watts, and each port will deliver 60 watts PoE++. We also have in the Nebula the XS 3800, which is a copper and fiber configuration aggregation switch, which is currently our flagship switch. We will introduce another flagship, but that will be as a teaser at the end.
That makes me curious.
Yeah. Now we've got the audience curious, right? Yeah, I guess with all of this increase in backbone, right, it moves down the chain, right? So we had 1 gig at the edge on the access point. Whatever the connectivity speed of the access point is, right, the bottleneck became the 1 gig. Now we start to move that from 1 gig to 2.5. up to 10 gig, depending on the capacity and how many devices are connected, etc. So then the switch goes to 10 gig.
But what next?
Well, but what goes after that, right?
After that, we can go up to 25 gig. Or
25 gig?
Or even 100 gig uplinks.
So, I mean, you must be talking about CX4800, right?
That's the new switch. That's our new flagship switch. So that has a backbone of 25 gig. It will have a 48-port 10/25 gig layout, and also 8 times a 25/100 gig uplink ports, which is a whopping speed. It's our new flagship, which will be available very soon.
So the switch itself then, with 25 gig, so this is QSFP28s, right? The modules that go into the port.
Correct, yes.
So it uses a combination of either 10 or 25 gig ports, okay? And then obviously then you have the QSFP28 uplink, which is a 100 gig variant as well, right?
Correct.
Okay, so this is a big switch.
Yeah,
right?
it looks like a quite critical switch as well. And I heard that this one will have hot swap power supply as well. Is that true, Luke?
Yes, it will be hot swappable power supplies, and even the fan modules will be hot swappable. So it's a mission critical switch. It will be stackable up to 2 devices. You can have a very good resilience in this product, especially when you use it as a core backbone switch, where you don't want to have any failure.
And Nebula.
Nebula.
Of course.
So we complete the cycle really with a very... Because right now the current core switch is pretty limited in terms of its functionality versus this switch, right? I think there'll be a lot more functionality in this switch. So that's very, very good to see that we complete the cycle. You know, we start off this journey on multi-gig, but we end at 100 gig, right?
Yeah, it looks like that multi-gig will be the standard, is what Kevin already mentioned before. Yeah, 1 gig was the standard, but obviously for 2025, I think we can say multi-gig will be the standard.
I would say so. I mean, 1 gig will not go away quickly, or in fact, probably never. It's like 100, the transition from 100 meg to 1 gig.
Yeah, for sure.
Long.
I mean, still today, we don't produce any 100 meg switches anymore, but some vendors still do, right?
Still there.
So they still exist, and some products still have 100 meg on the back of them. I mean, some phones, for example, there are phones that don't require more than 100 meg. But certainly, it's the same as that. This transition, it will pretty much be 1 gig to 2.5, and we'll see that has become pretty much the standard for everyday networking. But again, there'll still be 1 gig devices, and just much like PoE as well. The push CCTV is also pushing the
video. Don't forget video.
Yeah, so there are
8K.
Yeah, so there are many, many things driving a shift in switching for quite some time. Over the many, many years now, I mean a decade, right, we've had 1 gig as pretty much the standard. And now we start to see this shift to 2.5 because there are key drivers, like we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, lots of these different verticals that are doing it. I will say it again, but very, very much like a standard network, just a simple upgrade. It makes it much easier. And I spoke about my own thing at home,
exactly,
right?
yeah.
So,
it's not enterprise anymore, It's coming down, and now SMB are quite interested in this kind of new technology and new high-speed connectivity.
Yeah, and especially that you don't need to change all your cabling. It's just
a much more a cost-effective approach to upgrading them for sure. Yeah. So, okay. Well, I think that's a lot of information to take on board. So, thank you very much, Luke, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And, we look forward to seeing you in the next podcast.
Yeah, for
Thank you.
sure. And thank you all, the listeners, for joining again, and hopefully to see you next time.